A poor girl accompanies her sick mother through the halls of an elite hospital, where she notices an 8-year-old boy sitting alone, silently crying. Doctors and nurses try to communicate with him in vain, ignoring his desperate gestures. She realizes something no one else saw, and as she approaches, she uses sign language and reveals something that throws everyone into despair. The hospital smell was a strange mixture that tightened Lena's chest. It had the cold, clean scent of disinfectant she knew from community clinics, but here, in this immense place with marble floors that shone like mirrors, it mingled with an expensive, sweet floral perfume that seemed to cling to the important people rushing past. At 9 years old, her heart heavy with worry, Lena felt small and invisible in the seemingly endless corridor. Her worn-out sneakers, their tips faded and scuffed, seemed to scream that she didn't belong in this universe of polished dress shoes and leather briefcases. She curled up in a hard plastic chair, hugging her knees, as she waited for news about her mother, Anna. With every door that swung open, her heart leaped, hoping to see a doctor with a smile, but all she saw were serious faces and hurried footsteps. The spot in this hospital, one of the best in the country, had been a miracle won through a mountain of paperwork and a stroke of luck, but the relief of securing the treatment was mixed with a constant fear of the unknown. Lena's thoughts drifted to the small apartment where her younger brother, Leo, was waiting with their grandmother. She remembered that morning, before she left, when he had hugged her tight and made the sign for "I love you" with his small hands. It was to communicate with him, born without the ability to hear, that Lena had learned American Sign Language. It became their secret, the bridge connecting her to her brother's silent, expressive world. Now, sitting here, she felt a painful longing for the simplicity of that gesture, a comfort that felt miles away from the coldness of this hospital. Her mother, always so strong, was in a room somewhere in this labyrinth, fighting a battle Lena didn't fully comprehend, but whose weight she felt in every fiber of her being. The responsibility of being strong for everyone felt too heavy for her small shoulders. She closed her eyes for a moment, wishing she were anywhere else, but she knew her post was here, waiting, watching, hoping in silence. When she opened her eyes again, a small commotion across the hall caught her attention. A man in an impeccably tailored suit, his face creased with worry, was gesturing impatiently at a boy sitting in a chair identical to hers. The boy, who couldn't have been more than 8, wore clothes that looked like they were straight out of a catalogue, but his face was red and swollen from crying. They were silent tears, streaming down his cheeks without a single sob, making the scene even more desolate. A nurse was trying to speak to him in a falsely cheerful voice, offering a cup of water, but the boy just shook his head, growing more agitated. The man, likely his father, knelt in front of him, speaking with urgency, but his words seemed to hit an invisible wall. The boy didn't react to any sound. He just kept moving his hands frantically. Lena watched the scene, a lump forming in her throat. She knew that kind of desperation. It was the frustration of having something important to say and no one around to understand. The adult saw only a tantrum, a spoiled child's fit. The man, whose gold watch gleamed under the cold lights, seemed used to solving everything with orders and perhaps with his vast fortune. But here, before his own son, he was powerless. Lena leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the small hands moving with desperate urgency. He wasn't just gesturing. There was a pattern, a logic to the movements. He pressed one hand to his chest, then made a quick, repetitive motion with his fingers. Others might see only the chaos of a distressed child, but Lena felt a chill run down her spine. She recognized one of the signs, and then another. They were words, they were sentences. She held her breath, her heart pounding. While all the adults saw was silence and confusion, she realized the boy was screaming, and she was the only person in that entire immense hallway who could hear him. Lena's heart was a frantic drum in her small chest. Hesitation paralyzed her for a moment. Who was she to interfere? A girl in simple clothes, whose only valuable possession was the hope of seeing her mother get well. That man, with his imposing posture and the air of someone who commanded the world, would never listen to her. He lived in a reality of wealth and power, a universe of big deals and portfolio decisions, a place where the voice of a child like her had no echo. She should go back to her chair, pretend she saw nothing, and continue her silent vigil. It was the sensible thing to do. But then she looked at the boy again. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the same anguish she saw in her little brother when he couldn't express a pain or a fear. That boy, surrounded by luxury, was just as alone and misunderstood as Leo would be without her. And that thought was stronger than her fear. Empathy, that force that made her feel the pain of others as if it were her own, pushed her forward. She stood up, her legs a little shaky, and walked with slow but determined steps across the polished corridor. Each step took her further from her comfort zone and closer to that small hurricane of contained emotion. The boy's father, Ricardo, noticed her approach, and his face hardened. His expression was one of pure impatience, as if her presence were just another complication in an already unbearable day. "What do you want, kid?" he asked, his voice harsh, not even looking at her directly. More focused on his phone, which buzzed incessantly with notifications, the nurse, with a forced smile, tried to intercept her. "Honey, your place is over there, okay? Let the adults handle this." But Lena didn't stop. She didn't look at the wealthy man or the nurse. Her eyes were fixed on the boy. She stopped at a respectful distance and, completely ignoring the adults, raised her hands. Her fingers moved with familiar fluidity. First, a simple sign for hello. Then, with the gentleness she used with Leo, she signed, "My name is Lena." The boy, who until then had his face buried in his hands, slowly lifted his head. His eyes, red and swollen, widened. The agitation in his body suddenly ceased, as if someone had hit a pause button. He sat motionless, watching Lena's hands as if they were the most fascinating thing in the world. There was a glimmer of disbelief, a spark of hope in the midst of his storm of tears. Ricardo and the nurse fell silent, observing the bizarre scene, not understanding what was happening. To them, they were just random gestures in the air. To the boy, they were a life raft in an ocean of misunderstanding. Lena smiled softly and signed another phrase, the most important one of all, "I understand you." The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The boy let out a trembling sigh, and a new wave of tears streamed down his face. But this time, they weren't from frustration, they were from relief. Slowly, as if afraid the moment was a mirage, he raised his own trembling hands. His fingers moved a little clumsily, but clearly. "My name is Arthur," he signed. A genuine smile, the first Lena had seen on him, bloomed on his lips. The connection was made. In that loud, indifferent hallway, two children had created a private world, a bubble of silence and understanding. Ricardo stared from one to the other, confusion etched on his face. "What is going on? What is she doing?" he muttered to the nurse, who just shrugged. But Lena's joy was short-lived. Arthur, his face suddenly pale and a renewed urgency in his eyes, began signing rapidly, his gaze fixed on hers, begging her to understand. His small hands drew a story in the air, one that made Lena's smile vanish, replaced by an expression of pure shock. Arthur's hands moved with desperate speed, each gesture loaded with an urgency that chilled Lena's blood. She focused completely, deciphering the rapid succession of signs as if reading the most important page of a book. He pointed to his own chest, his hand in a fist, and then made the sign for pain. But it wasn't just any pain. He drew something sharp in the air, pointy, like a needle piercing his chest over and over. Then, He signed bad, 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 emphasizing the word with an expression of agony that was impossible to fake. He touched his neck and jaw, indicating the pain was radiating, climbing like a serpent of fire. Lena felt a pit in her stomach. This wasn't a common ache, a stomach ache or a headache. This was something serious. She remembered a medical show she'd watched with her grandma about emergencies, and the symptoms Arthur described sounded terrifyingly similar to something she'd heard on it. Her heart raced. Ricardo, Arthur's father, watched the interaction with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "What is he saying?" he asked, his voice still edged with impatience. To him, this was just a childish pantomime. Arthur had been through a battery of tests that morning. The doctors said it was just anxiety, a reaction to the hospital environment. The boy had always been too sensitive, his ex-wife used to say. Ricardo, a man whose days were filled with decisions about multi-million-dollar investments and the cash flow of his companies, had no time for what he considered childish drama. He loved his son, but he didn't know how to connect with him, especially since the deafness was diagnosed. Their communication was limited to notes and frustrated attempts at lip reading. American Sign Language seemed too complicated, a time commitment he never had. "It's just another fit," he thought, trying to convince himself. "He said he has a very bad pain in his chest," Lena said, turning to the man. Her voice came out quieter and more trembling than she intended. "He said it feels like a needle, and the pain is going up to his neck." The nurse, who was still nearby, sighed condescendingly. "Sweetie, we've already examined him. The doctor said his vitals are perfect. It's just nerves. He doesn't like hospitals. It's understandable." She smiled at Lena as if explaining something obvious. "You're very kind to try and help, but you don't need to worry." The dismissal in the woman's voice ignited a spark of indignation in Lena. They weren't listening. Worse, they weren't seeing. They saw a deaf boy having a tantrum, not a child trying to communicate a real and terrifying pain. She turned to Ricardo, her eyes pleading. "Please, sir. He's not lying. I know. I talk with my little brother like this every day. I know when it's real." Ricardo stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Part of him wanted to dismiss the girl and end the scene. His partners were waiting for a conference call about a new crypto investment that promised huge returns. But there was something in the seriousness of her gaze, an unshakable conviction that made him hesitate. And there was his son's face, pale, pleading, looking at the girl as if she were his only hope. Arthur began signing to Lena again, even more frantically. He made the sign for help, and then the sign for fast. Then he brought his hand to his heart and opened and closed it, mimicking a rapid, irregular beat. Lena's eyes widened. "He said his heart is beating funny," she translated, her voice thick with panic. "Like a scared bird." At that exact moment, a young doctor, Dr. Matthews, walked down the hall. The nurse called out to him, laughing, "Doctor, come see this. Looks like we have a new interpreter in the hospital." The doctor smiled, but his smile faded when he saw Arthur's pallor and Lena's terrified expression. He approached, his professional gaze suddenly alert. "What's going on here?" Before the nurse could give her mocking version, Lena stepped forward, fear giving way to a courage she didn't know she possessed. "Doctor, he's trying to say there's something very wrong with his heart, and nobody believes him." Dr. Matthews looked from Lena to Arthur, then to Ricardo, whose expression was a mask of conflict. The doctor, despite his youth, had a calm that inspired confidence. He crouched down to Arthur's eye level and smiled gently. "Hey, champ, I'm Dr. Matthews." Arthur just stared at him, his eyes full of distrust, and shrank back, turning his face toward Lena as if seeking refuge. The doctor then turned to the girl. "And who's our translator?" His voice held none of the nurse's mockery. There was genuine curiosity in it. "My name is Lena, and he's Arthur," she replied, feeling a bit more secure. "And what exactly did he tell you?" Lena took a deep breath. trying to remember every detail. He said he has a sharp pain in his chest that goes up to his neck, and that his heart is beating in a weird way, really fast and out of rhythm. The nurse intervened, her voice still dismissive. "Doctor, we already did a basic EKG and listened to his heart. There's nothing. His SATs are great. It's anxiety, as noted in his chart." Dr. Matthews frowned, thoughtful. He looked again at Arthur, who was now holding Lena's hand tightly. The trust the boy placed in the girl was palpable. It was a silent, a powerful connection that the doctor couldn't ignore. "Sometimes the initial tests don't show everything," he said quietly, more to himself. He turned to Ricardo. "Sir, I know the results were normal, but the description of the pain is specific, and his distress is real." Ricardo, a man accustomed to analyzing data, profit and loss statements, and making decisions based on concrete facts, was in unfamiliar territory. The medical facts said one thing, but his son's eyes and this girl's conviction said another. His paternal instinct, long dormant under layers of business deals and concerns for the family fortune, began to stir. "What do you suggest, doctor?" he asked, his voice less harsh. "I'd like to order an echocardiogram and a more detailed blood panel for cardiac enzymes. It's a routine procedure for atypical chest pain, but given the circumstances, I think it's prudent." The nurse huffed under her breath. "That'll take hours, doctor. The cardio schedule is packed." But Ricardo cut in, the authority returning to his voice. "I don't care. Do whatever it takes. I'll pay for whatever is necessary." The power of money, which had seemed useless to calm his son, could now, perhaps, buy the answers they needed. Dr. Matthews nodded. "I'll put in a stat order." He turned to Lena. "Can you please explain to him that we're going to do a different test? To see his heart from the inside, like a picture. Tell him it won't hurt." Lena nodded, and, with her hands, translated the doctor's message to Arthur. The boy's expression softened slightly, the fear in his eyes replaced by a sliver of hope. He squeezed Lena's hand and signed a single word, "You stay." The request hit Lena like an arrow. Her heart split in two. Her mother, she had to be here for her mother. At any moment, a doctor could come out with news. How could she abandon her post? She glanced down the hall where Anna's room was, feeling a pang of guilt. Her mother was her priority, her only priority. But then she looked at Arthur, at those eyes that saw her as his only anchor in this sea of confusion. To leave him now would be like setting him adrift. The conflict tore her apart. Help this boy she barely knew, or fulfill her duty as a daughter. It was an impossible choice. Her own family, her grandmother, her father, they would all urge her to focus only on Anna. They wouldn't understand. They'd say she was wasting her time on other people's problems, rich people's problems, who could afford any help they needed. But how could she turn her back? The anguish on her face was plain to see. Ricardo noticed her hesitation. "Kid, Lena, please stay with him just until the test. I need him to be calm." The plea in the voice of the multimillionaire, a man who had probably never asked anyone for anything, was the final straw. She took a deep breath, making a decision she knew would have consequences. "I'll stay," she said, her voice firm, and in sign, she answered Arthur, "Yes, I'll stay with you." The echocardiogram room was cold and dark, lit only by the bluish glow of the monitors. The only sounds were the low hum of the machine and the soft rustle of the technician's scrubs. Arthur lay on the exam table, his body tense under the thin hospital sheet. His wide, frightened eyes followed the technician's every move, every wire connected to his small chest. Lena sat in a chair beside him, holding his hand. His skin was cold and clammy. She gave him a reassuring smile whenever their eyes met, and with her free hand she made small signs. "It's okay. Brave, almost done." They were little anchors of calm in his storm of fear. Ricardo leaned against the wall near the door, a giant made uncomfortable by the small space. He watched the scene in silence, his phone forgotten in his pocket. For the first time in a long while, stock market charts and Bitcoin prices seemed irrelevant. Everything that mattered was in this room. He saw the way his son looked for Lena's face, the way her presence seemed to be the only cure for his anxiety. A pang of something he couldn't name, perhaps envy, perhaps shame, hit him. This girl, a complete stranger, had achieved in minutes what he, his father, had failed to do in years, a true connection. As the technician slid the transducer over Arthur's chest, Lena felt the weight of her decision. The image of her mother, lying alone in a hospital room, wouldn't leave her mind. What if she woke up and called for her? What if the doctor came out with important news and she wasn't there? The lump in her throat tightened. She was torn between two worlds, her own, one of family responsibility and the daily struggle for survival, and this one, Arthur's world, where money seemed to solve everything except loneliness and fear. She remembered a conversation with her grandmother the night before. "My dear, we have to focus on your mother. We don't have the energy for the world's problems." Her grandmother was right, of course. Her family needed her. But Arthur's gaze, so much like her brother Leo's, had broken through her defenses. How could she explain this to her family? How could she justify being here, holding the hand of a rich boy, while her own mother was battling a serious illness? The guilt was a crushing weight. "All right, all done," the technician said in a neutral voice. He wiped the gel from Arthur's chest and began removing the electrodes. Arthur sat up, immediately looking for Lena. She helped him put his shirt on, her fingers nimble and careful. Ricardo approached. "So, did you see anything?" he asked the technician, anxiety sharp in his voice. The man shrugged. "I'm not the one who reads the exams, sir. The results go directly to the cardiologist and Dr. Matthews. But—" he hesitated, glancing at the screen for a moment. His heart rate was very elevated during the procedure, higher than normal for an anxious child. The small observation hung in the air, heavy, with a meaning no one wanted to admit. On the way back to the waiting area, Arthur didn't let go of Lena's hand. It was as if he feared she would disappear if he did. Ricardo walked beside them in a thoughtful silence. He looked at Lena, at her simple clothes and her tired eyes, which were filled with a fierce determination. She wasn't much older than his son, yet she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. "What's your mother's name?" he asked suddenly, his voice soft. "Anna," Lena replied, surprised by the question. "How long has she been here?" 3 days, Lena said. "We're waiting for some test results to know what the next step is." Ricardo nodded, his gaze lost down the hallway. This girl's life was also a tangle of waiting and uncertainty. The difference was she didn't have a fortune to cushion the fall. The debt he felt toward her grew with every minute. It wasn't about money. It was something deeper, more human. He felt he owed her more than his entire net worth could ever repay. When they reached the waiting area, Lena's grandmother was there, her face pale and her eyes red. "Lena, where have you been? Your mother's doctor. He was here. He needs to talk to the family urgently." The floor seemed to vanish from under Lena's feet. Lena's world shrank to the size of her grandmother's anguished face. The words "doctor" and "urgent" echoed in her mind, drowning out all other sounds. The firm grip of Arthur's hand in hers, Ricardo's confused gaze, the distant hum of the hospital, it all faded away. An icy terror enveloped her. She let go of Arthur's hand abruptly, a gesture so sudden the boy flinched back in surprise. "Grandma, what did he say? Is she okay?" Her voice was a thread, fragile and trembling. Her grandmother, Eleanor, shook her head, the tears she'd been holding back finally escaping. "I don't know, my sweet girl. He wouldn't tell me. He said he needs to speak with the next of kin, but your father's at work and isn't answering. He just said the situation has changed." The situation has changed. That phrase, so vague and yet so full of terrifying possibilities, was like a punch to Lena's gut. She felt her legs weaken. Guilt hit her with the force of a tidal wave. She wasn't there. When the doctor came, when her mother needed her most, she was taking care of someone else. Her grandmother's words from days ago came back to haunt her. "We have to focus on your mother." Arthur, sensing the drastic shift in the atmosphere, watched Lena with wide eyes. He didn't understand the words, but he felt her pain. He saw the tears streaming down the face of the girl who had been his fortress, and his instinct was to move closer, to offer the same comfort he had received. He took a step forward and lightly touched her arm. Lena turned, her face contorted with pain and fear. Seeing Arthur, a complex mix of emotions washed over her. There was affection for the scared child she had just helped, but there was also a sudden, irrational resentment. If it weren't for him, she would have been here. She would have heard the doctor. She wouldn't be feeling this overwhelming panic of having failed her mother. She pulled away from his touch. A small step back that was like a chasm opening between them. Arthur recoiled, his hand still in the air, confusion and hurt plain on his face. He didn't understand what he had done wrong. Ricardo watched the scene, his heart clenching. He saw Lena's pain, the involuntary rejection, and the sadness on his son's face. He was the cause of this suffering. His needs, his son's needs, had put this girl in this impossible position. "Where is the doctor?" Lena asked her grandmother, her voice now steady, the warrior inside her taking control of the fear. "He said he'd be back in a few minutes." "He went to the East Wing," Elena answered, dabbing her eyes with a crumpled tissue. Lena didn't hesitate. She turned and began to run down the corridor, her worn sneakers making a soft, slapping sound on the polished marble. She didn't look back. She couldn't. If she looked at Arthur's hurt face, she might stop, and she couldn't stop. She had to know. She had to fix whatever was wrong. Ricardo felt an urge to follow her, to offer help. But what could he do? His money, his contacts, his power were useless against a family's raw pain. He knelt in front of Arthur, who was now crying silently, tears tracing paths down his cheeks. Ricardo hugged him, an awkward but sincere gesture. For the first time, he didn't try to say, "Don't cry" or "Be strong." He just held him, feeling the fragility of his son in his arms as his own eyes filled with tears. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that there were liabilities that didn't show up on a balance sheet, emotional debts that no amount of interest could ever repay. Lena ran like she had never run before. The hospital, once an intimidating maze, was now a racetrack with a single finish line. She didn't see people's faces, just dodged obstacles, her heart hammering against her ribs. She found the doctor, Dr. Anderson, an older man with a tired gaze, talking to a nurse at an information desk. "Doctor," she panted, stopping in front of him. "I'm Anna's daughter, Anna Reyes, from room 304. My grandmother said you wanted to speak with us." Dr. Anderson looked at her, surprise giving way to weary compassion. Yes. Your mother, the test results came back. Her condition is more complex than we thought. The initial treatment isn't working as we'd hoped." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She's going to need a procedure and then ongoing medication, a very specific and very expensive medication. I'm afraid the plan covering her admission doesn't have coverage for this treatment." The words hit her one by one, each heavier than the last, building an insurmountable wall right in front of her. The air left her lungs. It wasn't just the disease. It was something that not even all her courage and determination could fight. A lack of money. The silence that followed Dr. Anderson's words was more deafening than any noise. Very expensive. The phrase hung in the air, cold and final. A verdict. Lena felt the ground give way. The adrenaline that had fueled her run replaced by a frozen emptiness. All the sacrifices, the paperwork to get the spot, the sleepless nights, the carefully nurtured hope, it all seemed to be crumbling. She looked at the doctor, hoping to see some sign that it was a mistake, a possibility, an alternative. but his gaze was one of powerless compassion, the look of a man who had delivered this news too many times. "How much?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. The doctor hesitated. "It's a considerable amount, honey. It's not something you need to worry about. We need to speak with a responsible adult." But Lena cut him off, her voice gaining an unexpected strength. "I need to know, please." Seeing the unwavering determination in those childish eyes, Dr. Anderson relented. He mentioned a number that, to Lena, sounded as astronomical and unreal as the distance to the moon. It was more money than her family would see in a lifetime of work. Hope, as fragile as glass, shattered. She thanked the doctor with a mute nod and turned, walking back down the hall like an automaton. Each step was heavy, as if she were dragging chains. The future, which once held the image of her mother smiling and coming home, was now a blank canvas, a dense and terrifying fog. How would she tell her grandmother, her father, who already worked 2 jobs? The image of Leo, her little brother, came to her mind. He needed his mother. They all did. And she, the little warrior, the one who always found a solution, was completely and utterly defeated. As she neared the waiting area, she saw Ricardo still kneeling beside Arthur. He was talking to the boy, not with words, but with his hands. They were clumsy, hesitant gestures, like someone learning a new and difficult language. He pointed to his heart and made the sign for sorry. Arthur watched him, the hurt on his face giving way to surprised curiosity. In that small gesture, Lena saw a father trying for the first time to cross the bridge into his son's silent world. The scene, so tender and unexpected, should have warmed her heart, but it only made her feel more alone. They had each other. They had resources, a fortune capable of moving mountains. Their problem, Arthur's pain, would have a solution. Her problem, her mother's illness, had a price she could never pay. The injustice of it all suffocated her. When Ricardo saw her approaching, her face pale and devastated, he stood up. "Lena, what happened? Your mother—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. The answer was written all over her face. She couldn't speak. She just shook her head, and the tears she had held back with so much force finally came, a silent flood of despair. And then, something completely unexpected happened. Dr. Matthews' cell phone, as he approached them, rang. He answered it, his expression shifting from professional to alarmed. "What? The echo images, are you sure?" He listened for a few more seconds, his eyes wide. "I'm on my way right now." He hung up and looked at Ricardo, the urgency in his voice sweeping everything else away. "Ricardo, it's Arthur's tests. The cardiologist just saw the images from the echo. The technician was right. There's an anomaly, a serious anomaly, in his left coronary artery. It's a rare condition in children, and it often doesn't show up on basic scans." He took a deep breath, his face pale. The pain he was describing, it wasn't anxiety, it was real. "He's having a cardiac event now. We need to get him into emergency surgery immediately." Everyone's world stopped spinning. In the midst of her own despair, Lena lifted her head. The child she had helped, the boy everyone had ignored, was in mortal danger. And she had been the only one who had heard him. The news landed like a bomb in the hospital's quiet corridor, shattering the normalcy. Ricardo turned ghostly white, the color draining from his face as if all the blood had been pulled from him. He looked at Arthur, who, oblivious to the terrifying words, continued to watch everything with curious eyes. In an instant, the billionaire accustomed to controlling business empires was reduced to a terrified, utterly helpless father. "Surgery now! But how?" he stammered, his voice breaking. Dr. Matthews put a firm hand on his shoulder. "There's no time to lose. The team is being mobilized now. It's likely a congenital condition." The symptoms he described to Lena, the sharp pain, the radiation, the arrhythmia, they were textbook. We just weren't listening. She was. The doctor looked at Lena with a mixture of awe and remorse. You saved his life, kid. If we had waited any longer, it could have been too late. The nurse, who had previously mocked Lena, rushed past them pushing a gurney, her face serious and focused, not daring to even glance at the girl. The weight of those words, "You saved his life," hit Lena, but she could barely process them. Her own grief was a thick fog preventing her from feeling anything else. As nurses and doctors moved with frantic efficiency around Arthur, prepping him for surgery, the boy only had eyes for Lena. The fear, which had subsided, came roaring back. He reached his hand out to her, a silent plea in the midst of the chaos. Ricardo, still in shock, turned to her. "Lena, please, don't leave him. He needs you." The request was an echo of the one before, but now it carried the weight of life and death. The conflict inside Lena intensified into a physical ache. Her mother needed a financial miracle, and here she was, being pulled into the epicenter of another family's drama. But how could she say no? How could she abandon this terrified child about to face the trial of his life, a trial she herself had unknowingly uncovered? She looked at her grandmother, who was watching everything with frightened eyes. Elena, despite her own anguish, saw her granddaughter's dilemma. She came closer and touched Lena's cheek. "Go, my child," she said softly. "Your mother wouldn't want you to turn your back on a scared little boy. I'll stay here. I'll wait. Go." Her grandmother's permission was the only thing that allowed her to take the next step. She took Arthur's hand as they wheeled him down the corridors toward the surgical wing. The boy wasn't crying, but his grip was so tight the knuckles of his fingers were white. Lena walked beside the gurney, her face level with his, signing words of comfort, strong, brave, over soon, I'm here. They were the same words she used with Leo when he had a fever or was afraid of the dark. In that moment, the barriers of class, money, and circumstance vanished. They were just two children facing a giant. On the other side of the gurney, Ricardo walked, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in urgent tones. "Cancel everything. My schedule for next week, next month. I don't care about the market close in Asia or the volatility of Bitcoin. None of it matters. Just cancel it." The man who lived for his business was, for the first time, putting someone above his portfolio. They arrived at a restricted area with double doors and a red light glowing above. "She can't go past here," a nurse said. It was time to say goodbye. Arthur panicked. He clung to Lena, fear spilling from his eyes. Lena hugged him tight, feeling his little heart hammering against hers. She pulled back slightly and looked him in the eyes. With her hands, she made a sign her brother Leo had taught her, one they used when they missed each other. She joined the tips of her thumbs and index fingers, forming a small heart, and then pushed it toward him, as if sending him her own. "To give you strength," she signed, with a trembling smile. Arthur, his eyes full of tears, mimicked the gesture. It was their silent promise. As the doors swung shut, separating them, Lena stood frozen, the image of the little heart he'd made seared into her mind. The weight of what had just happened, combined with her own anguish, finally brought her down. She leaned against the cold corridor wall, slid to the floor, and there, alone, she wept. She wept for Arthur, for her mother, for the injustice, for the powerlessness, and for the overwhelming fear that was consuming everything. The hours that followed were a blur of anxiety and silence. The surgical waiting room was a place suspended in time, where each tick of the wall clock echoed like a hammer blow. Lena sat in one of the plastic chairs, curled into a ball, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Her grandmother sat beside her, holding her hand, offering a mute comfort that was all she could give. Lena's mind was a maelstrom. She replayed the conversation with her mother's doctor, the astronomical number, the final verdict. Then the image would shift to Arthur, his scared face, the little heart made with his hands. She felt as if she were living two tragedies at once, each pulling her in a different direction, threatening to tear her apart. Where did her loyalty lie? With the mother who gave her life, or the boy whose life she had just saved? The question was torture. She felt like a traitor, no matter which way she turned. Ricardo didn't sit. He paced at the end of the hall like a caged animal. His expensive suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, and he ran his hands through his hair every few seconds. The facade of control and power had completely disintegrated, revealing a terrified man. Every so often, he would stop and look at Lena, a complex expression on his face. It was a mixture of infinite gratitude and crushing guilt. He knew, with painful clarity, that if it weren't for this little girl, his son might no longer be alive. He, with all his wealth and assets, with access to the best doctors in the world, had been blind and deaf to his own son's suffering. A 9-year-old girl, with nothing but empathy and knowledge, had seen what all the experts had missed. The irony was cruel. He had spent his life accumulating a fortune, building a legacy of property and business, yet he had almost lost his most precious inheritance through sheer emotional negligence. The doors to the surgical wing opened, and a surgeon, mask hanging around his neck, his expression tired but calm, approached. Ricardo stopped pacing instantly, his body rigid. The surgery was a success, the doctor said, and the relief that flooded the hallway was almost palpable. The anomaly was exactly where we suspected. We were able to correct the blood flow. He's a strong boy. He'll need some recovery time in the ICU, but the outlook is excellent. Ricardo staggered back against the wall, closing his eyes and murmuring a "thank you" that seemed directed at a much higher power. Lena felt a wave of relief so intense it almost made her dizzy. A piece of the weight on her shoulders dissolved. Arthur was safe. She had done the right thing. The surgeon continued, looking directly at Ricardo. "I want you to know, the timely intervention was crucial. A few more hours, and the damage to the heart muscle could have been irreversible. Whoever insisted on the tests, even with the normal initial results, saved your son's life." Ricardo didn't hesitate. He pointed to Lena, who was still sitting, watching everything in silence. It was her. She told me. She understood what he was trying to say. The surgeon looked at the little girl, surprise clear in his eyes. He gave a small, tired smile. "Well then, we have a hero among us." The doctor's words, spoken so casually, made Lena blush. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt exhausted and scared, and the worry for her mother came rushing back, filling the space that relief for Arthur had left. With the immediate crisis over, the reality of her own situation hit her again, harder than before. After the doctor left, Ricardo slowly approached and stood before Lena and her grandmother. He looked like a different man, older, humbler. "I don't know how to thank you," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "There are no words. There isn't enough money in the world to pay for what you did for my son." He paused, swallowing hard. "I heard your grandmother earlier, talking about your mother, about the treatment." Lena looked up at him, her heart beginning to pound. A mix of fear and a spark of hope she didn't dare to name. What was he going to say? What could he do? The distance between their two worlds, one of scarcity and one of abundance, had never seemed so vast and yet so close to colliding. Ricardo looked at Lena, and in his eyes, the girl saw a universe of emotions that went far beyond simple gratitude. There was relief, shame, and a newfound determination. "I want to pay for your mother's treatment," he said. The words coming out directly, without preamble. All of it, the surgery, the medications, whatever she needs, consider it done. The offer hung in the air, so monumental and unbelievable that Lena and her grandmother sat in silence, just blinking as if trying to understand a foreign language. For Ricardo, it was a simple decision, a line item in his vast cash flow, a transfer of a tiny fraction of his net worth. For Lena, it was the world. It was her mother's life. It was the solution to a problem that minutes before had seemed like an unmovable mountain. Tears welled in Lena's eyes, but this time they were tears of staggering relief. The hope she hadn't dared to feel exploded inside her, a blinding light. Elena, however, recovered from the initial shock, and her expression hardened. Pride, forged in a lifetime of hardship and hard work, spoke up. "We thank you, sir, from the bottom of our hearts. But we can't accept. We're not beggars. We don't want charity." The refusal was spoken softly, but with unshakable firmness. Lena looked at her grandmother, stunned. How could she refuse? It was their only chance. "Grandma, please," she started, but her grandmother silenced her with a look. Ricardo didn't seem surprised or offended. He had expected it. He knelt in front of Elena, a gesture of humility that disarmed some of the older woman's rigidity. "Please, don't see it as charity," he said, his voice gentle. "See it as a trade, a payment. Your granddaughter gave me something that all my money, all my assets could never buy, my son's life. What I'm offering is a pittance in comparison. This is about justice. I am in her debt, a debt that, frankly, I can never fully repay. Please allow me to at least try." The sincerity in his voice, the humility in his posture, began to melt Elena's armor of pride. She looked at her granddaughter, at her face streaked with hopeful tears, and knew she couldn't deny this. With a trembling sigh, she nodded. "May God bless you, son." The next day, news of Ricardo's generosity spread like wildfire through his family. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. It was his brothers, his cousins, the trustees of his father's estate. "Have you lost your mind?" his older brother shouted, a man who saw the world as one giant spreadsheet. "Paying for some stranger's medical treatment? That sets a dangerous precedent. You're being manipulated by a sob story. Our capital is not a charity." Another cousin called, his voice dripping with false concern. "Ricardo, think of the family's assets. These people could be con artists. You need to protect yourself. A clever little girl can be very convincing." The accusations hit him, but they didn't sway him. For the first time, his family's opinion on his finances didn't matter. He saw their greed and suspicion with a painful clarity. They didn't see a woman's life or a little girl's heroic act. They saw only numbers, a potential dip in the family fund's profitability. "It's my money," he responded coldly to his brother, "and I decide how to use it. If you had seen what that girl did, you'd understand this is the best investment I've ever made in my entire life." He hung up the phone, feeling more distant from his family than ever. They lived in a world of gold and stocks, but they were bankrupt of what truly mattered. The fight, however, was far from over. His relatives, fearing his impulsive generosity might affect their own future dividends, began moving behind the scenes, consulting lawyers, threatening to freeze some of his assets on the grounds that he was not of sound mind. The battle to save Lena's mother wouldn't just be against a disease, but against the pettiness of a world that valued money more than life. And in the midst of it all, Lena received another piece of news. Her own mother, upon learning of the offer, was also refusing to accept. Anna's refusal was an unexpected and devastating blow. Lena walked into the hospital room, her heart soaring with the miraculous news, ready to share the solution that had fallen from the sky. She found her mother sitting up in bed, her face pale, but her eyes burning with the same flame of pride she'd seen in her grandmother. "I heard what that boy's father offered," Anna said, her voice weak but firm. "I can't accept it, my daughter." Lena felt the floor open up beneath her for the second time in 24 hours. "But why, Mom? It's our only chance." "Mister, Ricardo doesn't care. He wants to help." Anna looked at her daughter, her eyes full of love and a deep sadness. "I know he does, honey, and I'm eternally grateful to you for saving his son. You are my hero, but I can't build my health on a foundation of charity. I've spent my whole life working, holding my head high. I don't want to be seen as some rich man's pity project. We have our dignity." Lena felt a wave of frustration. "But it's not pity, Mom." He said it himself. "It's a debt. It's justice." The words came out louder than she'd intended. She couldn't understand. How could dignity be more important than life? How could pride build a wall just when a door was opening? The argument, though gentle, was one of the most difficult moments of Lena's life. She tried to reason, to explain, but her mother seemed unmovable. For Anna, accepting that money meant admitting defeat, a failure to provide for herself and her family, a stigma she wasn't willing to bear. The girl left the room with a heavy heart, feeling crushed between her family's unyielding pride and the solution that was just within her grasp. Victory felt like it had been snatched from her hands. Meanwhile, Ricardo was fighting his own battle. The pressure from his family intensified. Lawyers sent formal notices, questioning his competence to manage the family assets, a vast network of businesses and financial holdings. They accused him of making emotional decisions that jeopardized everyone's inheritance. Ricardo spent hours on tense calls, defending his position not just as a personal choice, but as a moral imperative. "Don't you get it?" he yelled during a call with his uncle, the family patriarch. "We've spent generations accumulating wealth. For what? To count coins in a vault? For the first time, this money has a chance to do something that actually matters, something that transcends profits and interest. And you want to stop me?" His family's hypocrisy disgusted him. They, who lived surrounded by luxury, refused to extend a hand to save a life, viewing it only as a liability on their spreadsheets. In the middle of this turmoil, the only peace Lena found was at Arthur's side. He had been moved from the ICU to a private room, and she spent a few hours with him each day. Their communication flowed effortlessly. They played board games, drew pictures, and talked for hours in sign language. In his presence, Lena could forget the adult problems and just be a 9-year-old girl. During one of these afternoons, while they were drawing, Arthur turned serious. He looked at Lena and began to sign slowly, telling her something he had never told anyone. He spoke about how, before her, no one really listened to him. His parents, his teachers, his cousins, they all talked at him, but not with him. He spoke of the crushing loneliness of being in a room full of people and feeling invisible. He described the frustration of feeling pain or fear and being unable to express it, often being accused of being fussy or dramatic. The chest pain, he revealed, wasn't the first he had felt. There had been others, milder ones, that he had tried to communicate only to be ignored. What everyone called anxiety was actually the silent terror of his own body betraying him with no one to believe him. He told her how sometimes he felt anger and sadness so deep that his chest ached, a different kind of pain, the pain of not being understood. The revelation hit Lena with immense force. This boy hadn't just been neglected physically. He had been emotionally mistreated, his soul wounded by the barrier of silence. Her friendship hadn't just saved his life, it was healing wounds far older and deeper. And it was in that moment, understanding the depth of Arthur's suffering, that Lena knew what she had to do to convince her mother. Lena returned to her mother's room, not with pleas, but with a story. She sat on the edge of the bed, took Anna's hand, and with a serenity that belied her age, she began to speak. She didn't talk about money or debts or justice. She talked about Arthur. She described the world of silence and loneliness he lived in, a world where having everything meant having no one who truly understood him. She told her how the boy had confessed his old pains, his failed attempts to communicate his fear, and how the adults' indifference had made him believe his suffering was imaginary, a flaw within him. "Mom," Lena said. Her eyes locked on her mother's. "You always taught me that the worst poverty isn't a lack of money, but a lack of someone to listen, the loneliness of feeling something you can't share. Arthur lived in that poverty every single day. Anna listened in silence, her expression of stubborn pride slowly melting away, replaced by a deep understanding. Lena continued, "When I understood him, when I used the signs I learned for Leo, it was like I gave a glass of water to someone dying of thirst. And now his father wants to give us this help, not because we're poor, but because he understands the value of what I gave his son. It's his way of saying thank you. It's not charity, Mom. It's a bridge between his pain and ours. If we refuse, we break that bridge. We tell him that the connection we made is worthless, that our pride is more important than his gratitude." Tears streamed down Anna's face. She looked at her daughter, this small girl with such a large soul, and saw the truth in her words. This wasn't about accepting money. It was about accepting a human connection, forged in pain and empathy. "You're right, my daughter," Anna whispered, her voice choked. "You are absolutely right." At that exact instant, the door to the room swung open with a bang. A nurse rushed in, her face tense. "Dr. Anderson is on his way. There's been a change in your mother's labs. Her pressure dropped suddenly. We need to take her for an emergency procedure. Now!" The relief of one moment was shattered by the panic of the next. As the medical team swarmed into the room, moving with speed and efficiency, Lena stood frozen. It was all happening too fast. At the same time, Ricardo appeared at the doorway, his face pale. "Lena," he said, his voice filled with a desperate urgency. "Arthur's surgery, the pediatric cardiac surgeon, only has one emergency window today. It has to be at the same time. He's terrified. He won't stop signing your name. He's refusing to cooperate with the nurses. He needs you, please." Lena stood motionless in the middle of the hallway, the epicenter of two colliding crises. To her left, they were wheeling her mother on a gurney toward an emergency procedure from which she might not return. Her mother looked at her, eyes full of fear, reaching out her hand. To her right, the most powerful father in the city was begging her to be the safe harbor for his son, the boy she had saved, who was about to face his own open-chested battle. Lena's heart broke. Her mother, her duty, her love, her world. Arthur, her promise, her connection. The terrified child who trusted only her. She couldn't split herself in two. She had to choose to be with her mother, perhaps in her most critical moments, or to fulfill the silent promise she had made to a scared little boy. The promise held in that small heart made with their hands, the sound of her mother's gurney rolling away in one direction, while Ricardo's pleading gaze pulled her in the other. Time stood still. The hallway became the stage for the most impossible decision of her life. She closed her eyes, her mother's face and Arthur's spinning in her mind. Then she took a deep breath, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, and she walked. Lena walked toward Ricardo. Her choice wasn't made with her mind, but with a deep instinct that whispered where she was most needed in that terrifying instant. She looked up at Arthur's father, her own face marked by the agony of the decision she'd just made. "I'll go with Arthur," she said, her voice firm, though her heart was shattering into 1,000 pieces. "But you have to promise me the very best doctor will take care of my mother. Promise me you will wait right outside that door for her, for me." Ricardo, his eyes brimming with tears of gratitude and awe, gripped her shoulders. "I promise, Lena. I swear it. I will take care of everything. She will have the best team, the best treatment. I will not leave that operating room door until she is safe." The promise, made by a man whose world she had just saved, was the only solace Lena had. She turned and ran toward Arthur's room, not allowing herself to look back in the direction her mother had disappeared. At Arthur's side, she was the calm in the storm. As the nurses prepped him, she held his hand, signing stories about Leo, about their games, and about how brave he was when he got shots. She transformed the sterile, frightening environment into a bubble of safety. When the anesthesiologist approached, Arthur began to tremble, but Lena looked into his eyes and made the heart sign, pushing it toward him. "To give you strength," she signed. Arthur took a deep breath and mimicked the gesture before his eyes slowly drifted shut. Lena kissed his forehead and stepped back, letting them take him. Outside, the hours crawled by like an eternity. Lena didn't sit. She stood, her forehead pressed against the cool glass of a window at the end of the hall, staring at the city below without seeing a thing. Every minute was a torture of the imagination, her mind conjuring the worst-case scenarios for both her mother and Arthur. Finally, the doors opened. First, Arthur's surgeon, with a tired smile. It went perfectly. He's in recovery now. You can see him soon. A sigh of relief shuddered through Lena's body. One battle won. Minutes later, from the other end of the hall, another door opened. Ricardo, who had kept his promise and stood vigil, shot to his feet as Dr. Anderson approached. Lena held her breath. The procedure was delicate, but we managed to stabilize her, the doctor said. The medication has already started to work. She's strong. She'll need complete rest. But she's out of danger. Lena felt her legs give out and would have collapsed if Ricardo hadn't caught her. The emotional and physical exhaustion overwhelmed her, and she cried in his arms, a cry of relief, of pain, of a sorrow and joy so intermingled it was impossible to tell them apart. The first victory, saving Arthur, had come at the agonizing cost of not being by her mother's side. But now, the second victory had arrived. Her mother was safe. In the days that followed, a new routine formed. The surgeries had been successful. Anna recovered slowly, the new treatment showing results every day. Arthur, with the boundless energy of a child, recovered by leaps and bounds, with Lena as his most constant visitor. Their friendship deepened, a bond forged in the fires of crisis. Ricardo, true to his word, not only covered all of Anna's medical expenses, but did something no one expected. He used his influence and a significant portion of his capital to create a foundation, the Anna and Arthur Foundation, dedicated to funding expensive medical treatments for families who couldn't afford them, with a special focus on children with communication challenges. He had turned gratitude into action, a personal debt into a legacy of altruism. His family, seeing the positive media attention and Ricardo's new purpose in life, fell silent. A few even asked to be on the foundation's board in a belated attempt at redemption. Lena's ultimate victory was not just that 2 lives were saved, but that she had built a bridge that would now allow many others to cross safely. 4 weeks after that first meeting in the cold hospital corridor, the world looked like a completely different place. The afternoon sun streamed through the immense windows of Ricardo's mansion, illuminating a playroom larger than Lena's entire apartment. On a soft rug, 2 children sat cross-legged, laughing without making a sound. Arthur, a thin, nearly invisible scar on his chest, moved a piece on a chessboard. Lena, a smile never leaving her face, captured his knight with a swift move. Arthur made an exaggerated face of defeat and then signed, "You cheated," and they both collapsed in silent laughter. A perfect communication that only they understood. The hospital hallways that had witnessed such desperation and fear were now just a distant memory. That silence, once a synonym for isolation, had transformed into the sacred, secret language of an unlikely friendship. Ricardo watched them from the doorway, his heart overflowing with an emotion he could barely name. He, who had spent his life focused on numbers, on accumulating wealth, on analyzing stock markets and business profitability, had learned the most valuable lesson of all from a 9-year-old girl. The greatest asset anyone can possess is a generous heart. He had found a new purpose, not in growing his fortune, but in using it to lessen the suffering of others. The foundation was already helping dozens of families, and the hospital waiting room, where Lena had translated Arthur's desperation, was now a place where other families were given hope. Anna, Lena's mother, was home, regaining her strength day by day. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by a serene gratitude. She looked at her daughter not just with love, but with a profound respect. The girl she feared leaving helpless in the world had proven she possessed the kind of strength and compassion that moves mountains, that turns tragedies into miracles. Her initial refusal to accept help, that wounded pride, seemed so foolish now. She understood that accepting Ricardo's help hadn't been an act of submission, but of communion, a bond that had linked their families forever. The money that saved her life was merely the symbol of something far more powerful: human connection. American Sign Language, which had once been a family necessity for Lena to communicate with her little brother Leo, had become a magic key that opened a door between two worlds. It proved that true communication lies not in the words we speak, but in our capacity to truly listen and understand another's pain. The girl who sacrificed her time and peace of mind to help a stranger discovered, in practice, what her grandmother had always told her in theory: generosity is an echo. What you give to the world gives back, multiplied. On that sunny afternoon, as Lena and Arthur planned their next move, the circle was complete. The boy who had been trapped in a silent universe found not only his voice through signs, but a heart that understood him perfectly. The millionaire who saw the world only through dollar signs learned that the most valuable wealth is invisible to the eye. And the girl, the small, silent hero, had gained not a fortune in cash or gold, but something infinitely more precious: the certainty that the most powerful miracles sometimes come from the smallest hands and the purest hearts. And in their friendship, which blossomed in the most unlikely of places, was the proof that no matter how different we are, the language of empathy is universal.